Sophie had always looked up to her older sister, Mia. Growing up, Mia was the one who led the way, strong, confident, and always ready with advice or a helping hand. Mia had been the rock in Sophie's life, the one she turned to during difficult times. When Sophie married Mark, Mia was her maid of honor, standing proudly by her side. Their bond was one that seemed unbreakable. In the early days of her marriage, Sophie felt blessed. Mark was attentive, kind, and supportive, and they shared dreams of building a future together. Mia was a frequent visitor in their home, often coming over for dinner or staying the weekend. The three of them would sit around the dining table, laughing, sharing stories, and reminiscing about old times. It was a picture-perfect scenario, and Sophie was content. But as the years went on, subtle changes began to creep into their lives. Mark started to work longer hours, and Sophie found herself spending more time alone. Mia, always eager to help, began visiting even more frequently, offering to cook, clean, or just keep Sophie company. On the surface, everything seemed normal, but Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. It was the little things that bothered her, how Mark and Mia seemed to share inside jokes that Sophie wasn't part of, the way they exchanged glances when they thought she wasn't looking, or how they seemed to stand a little too close when they talked. Sophie told herself she was being paranoid, that she was imagining things, but the unease in her heart grew stronger with each passing day. One late afternoon, Sophie decided to leave work early. She wanted to surprise Mark with his favorite dinner and perhaps rekindle the connection that had started to fade between them. As she pulled into the driveway, she noticed Mia's car parked outside. A warm feeling of family comforted her. Mia must have come over to help, as she often did. Sophie entered the house quietly, not wanting to disturb whatever was going on. The house was unusually silent, and she wondered if Mark and Mia had stepped out. She set her bags down in the kitchen and began preparing dinner. But something gnawed at her, a nagging sense that something wasn't right. As she walked up the stairs, the silence in the house became more pronounced. Sophie's heart began to pound, her palms growing clammy as she approached the guest bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. It was Mia's room when she stayed over, a room that had always been a space of comfort for Sophie. But today, as she neared the door, she heard voices, low, urgent whispers that sent a chill down her spine. With her heart in her throat, Sophie pushed the door open slightly, peering inside. What she saw made her blood run cold. Mark and Mia were standing close, too close, their bodies pressed together in an intimate embrace. Mia's hand was on Mark's cheek, and their faces were just inches apart, sharing a closeness that was unmistakably more than just sibling affection. The room spun around Sophie as the reality of what she was seeing hit her like a ton of bricks. Her mind struggled to process the betrayal unfolding before her eyes. The two people she loved and trusted most were betraying her in the most unimaginable way. She gasped, unable to contain the shock that surged through her. Mark and Mia froze, their heads snapping towards the door. The color drained from their faces as they saw Sophie standing there, her expression a mixture of hurt, disbelief, and anger. Mia quickly pulled away from Mark, but the damage was done. Sophie, Mark stammered, taking a step towards her, but Sophie backed away, shaking her head in denial. I can't believe this, Sophie whispered, her voice breaking. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she fought them back, her emotions a chaotic mix of rage and heartbreak. Without another word, Sophie turned and fled from the room, her footsteps echoing through the empty hallway. She could hear Mark calling after her, but she didn't stop. She couldn't face them, couldn't confront the reality of what she had just witnessed. All she could think about was getting away, escaping the nightmare that her life had suddenly become. Sophie drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring through her tears. Her mind was in turmoil, replaying the scene over and over again. How long had this been going on? How could they betray her like this? Questions flooded her mind, but there were no answers, only a deep, aching pain that threatened to consume her. After what felt like hours, she found herself parked at the edge of a quiet park. She sat in the car, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she tried to steady her breathing. The tears came in waves, and she let them, unable to hold back the flood of emotions any longer. It was nearly dawn when Sophie finally pulled herself together enough to drive home. She felt numb, the initial shock giving way to a cold, hollow emptiness. She knew she couldn't avoid them forever. She had to face them, demand an explanation. But the thought of confronting Mark and Mia filled her with dread. When she walked through the door, the house was dark and silent, save for the soft glow of a lamp in the living room. Mark and Mia were sitting on the couch, waiting for her. They looked up as she entered, their faces etched with guilt and fear. "Sophie, we need to talk," Mark began, his voice trembling. Sophie didn't respond. She stood there, her arms crossed, her eyes cold and distant. The air in the room was thick with tension, the silence suffocating. Mia was the first to break. She stood up, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Sophie, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "I never meant for this to happen. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake." Sophie's gaze snapped to her sister, her voice icy. "A mistake," she repeated, her words laced with bitterness. "You don't just accidentally fall into bed with someone, Mia. You made a choice to betray me." Mia's face crumpled as she began to cry, but Sophie felt no sympathy. The betrayal was too fresh, the wound too deep. She turned to Mark, who was sitting with his head in his hands, unable to meet her gaze. "How long?" Sophie demanded, her voice rising. "How long has this been going on?" Mark finally looked up, his eyes filled with remorse. "A few months," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophie felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her. Her mind struggled to comprehend the depth of their betrayal. The life she thought she knew was crumbling before her eyes, and she was powerless to stop it. "I don't even know who you are anymore," Sophie said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Both of you." Mia took a step towards her, reaching out, but Sophie recoiled. "Don't," she snapped, her voice cold. "Don't you dare touch me." Mark stood up, desperation in his eyes. "Sophie, please. We can get through this. I know we can. I'm so sorry, but I love you. I don't want to lose you." Sophie shook her head, her heart breaking as she looked at the man she had once loved so deeply. "You already lost me, Mark," she whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. "You and Mia, you've both destroyed everything." With that, Sophie turned and walked out of the room, her heart heavy with the weight of their betrayal. She knew she couldn't stay in the house any longer. She needed space, time to think, to process everything that had happened. Sophie moved out the next day, packing a suitcase and leaving without another word. She went to stay with a close friend, someone who had known her for years and who offered her the support and space she needed to heal. Sophie cut off all contact with Mark and Mia, unable to bear the thought of facing them again. The days that followed were some of the darkest of Sophie's life. She felt lost, adrift in a sea of pain and confusion. The betrayal had shattered her world, leaving her struggling to pick up the pieces of her life. She sought therapy, finding solace in talking through her emotions with someone who could offer guidance and perspective. As the weeks turned into months, Sophie began to rebuild her life, slowly but surely. She threw herself into her work, finding distraction in her career and reconnected with old friends who helped her find joy in life again. But the pain of Mark and Mia's betrayal was never far from her mind, a constant reminder of the trust that had been broken. Sophie filed for divorce, knowing that her marriage with Mark was beyond repair. It was a painful process, but one that was necessary for her to truly move on. She also made the difficult decision to distance herself from Mia, at least for the time being. The bond they had shared had been irrevocably damaged, and Sophie knew that it would take a long time for her to even consider rebuilding their relationship. As time passed, Sophie found herself growing stronger, more confident in her ability to move forward. She learned to value herself and the relationships that truly mattered, surrounding herself with people who supported and uplifted her. Slowly, she began to rediscover the joy and passion that had been missing from her life for so long. Sophie eventually met someone new, a kind, understanding man who treated her with the respect and care she deserved. It wasn't easy to open her heart after everything she had been through, but Sophie knew that she couldn't let the past dictate her future. She took things slowly, allowing herself the time and space to heal before fully committing to a new relationship. As for Mark and Mia, they both tried to reach out to her, to apologize and make amends. But Sophie had made her decision. She forgave them for her own peace of mind, but she knew that some relationships were too damaged to be salvaged. She wished them well, but she knew that her path lay elsewhere. Years later, Sophie looked back on that time in her life with a sense of clarity and acceptance. She had grown so much since then, learning to value herself and the relationships that truly mattered. She knew that the pain she had endured had shaped her into the person she was today, a person who was strong, resilient, and unafraid to stand up for herself. And as she stood on the balcony of her new home, looking out at the sunset with her loving partner by her side, Sophie felt a sense of peace that she hadn't known in a long time. She had found happiness again, not in spite of the betrayal, but because she had chosen to rise above it and create a new life for herself. In the end, Sophie had learned that while the shadows of deceit could be dark and overwhelming, they didn't have to define her. She had the power to step into the light, to reclaim her life, and to find the love and happiness she truly deserved. Sophie's life continued to flourish as she embraced the lessons she had learned from her past. She became a source of strength and inspiration for others who had faced similar betrayals, using her experience to help others navigate their own journeys of healing and self-discovery. She and Mia eventually reconnected, years later, after enough time had passed for the wounds to heal. Their relationship would never be what it once was, but they found a way to move forward, to rebuild a new kind of bond based on honesty and mutual respect. Sophie's journey was one of resilience and transformation, a testament to the power of forgiveness and the strength of the human spirit. She had faced the darkest depths of betrayal and emerged stronger, more self-assured, and ready to embrace the future with an open heart. Sophie's journey of healing was far from linear. There were days when the pain felt as fresh as it did the moment she discovered the betrayal. On these days, she leaned heavily on her friends and her therapist, finding solace in their unwavering support. Sophie attended a support group for individuals who had experienced infidelity. Hearing the stories of others who had faced similar betrayals helped her realize that she was not alone. She found strength in their shared experiences and began to understand that healing was a process, one that required patience and self-compassion. Mark reached out several times, desperate to make amends. Each message and call went unanswered, not out of spite, but because Sophie needed space to heal without his presence complicating her emotions. She needed to rebuild her life on her terms, free from the shadow of their shared past. Mia, too, tried to reach out. She sent letters, each one filled with apologies and pleas for forgiveness. Mia wrote about her regret, her sorrow, and her hope that one day they could rebuild their relationship. Sophie read each letter, tears streaming down her face, but she wasn't ready to respond. The wounds were still too raw. Years passed, and slowly but surely, Sophie began to feel whole again. She threw herself into her career, rising to new heights and earning the respect of her colleagues. She traveled, exploring new places and rediscovering passions she had set aside. One day, while attending a conference in a different city, Sophie met Daniel. He was a fellow professional, intelligent, kind, and with a sense of humor that immediately put her at ease. They connected over their shared interests, and Sophie found herself laughing and enjoying his company more than she had with anyone in a long time. Daniel was patient and understanding, never pushing Sophie to reveal more than she was comfortable with. As their relationship deepened, Sophie slowly opened up about her past, about the betrayal that had shaped so much of her recent life. Daniel listened without judgment, offering support and empathy. With Daniel, Sophie discovered a new kind of love, one built on mutual respect, honesty, and a deep emotional connection. It was different from what she had experienced with Mark, and for the first time, she felt truly valued and understood. It took many years, but eventually, Sophie felt ready to confront her past and the people who had hurt her. She decided to meet with Mia, knowing that this conversation was essential for her healing. They met at a quiet cafe, a neutral ground where they could talk openly. Mia looked nervous, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear as Sophie approached. "Sophie, I'm so sorry," Mia began, tears welling up in her eyes. "I've regretted what happened every single day. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope we can find a way to move forward." Sophie took a deep breath, the emotions swirling inside her. "Mia, what you and Mark did hurt me more than I can put into words. But I've spent a long time healing and rebuilding my life. I've learned that holding on to anger and resentment only keeps me tied to the pain." Mia nodded, her tears spilling over. "I've missed you so much, Sophie. You're my sister, and I hate that I betrayed you." Sophie reached across the table, taking Mia's hand in hers. "I miss you too, Mia. We can't change the past, but we can try to build a new future. It will take time, and things won't ever be the same, but I'm willing to try if you are." Mia nodded, relief washing over her face. "I'm willing. I'll do whatever it takes." Sophie and Mia began the slow process of rebuilding their relationship. They started with small steps, meeting for coffee, talking about their lives, and gradually addressing the deeper issues that had driven them apart. Trust wasn't easily regained, but with time and effort, they found a way to reconnect. Mark remained a part of Sophie's past, a chapter that she had closed. She wished him well but knew that her future lay elsewhere. She focused on her relationship with Daniel, which continued to grow stronger. They moved in together, and for the first time in years, Sophie felt truly at peace. One sunny afternoon, Sophie and Daniel hosted a small gathering at their home. Among the guests was Mia, who had become a regular part of Sophie's life again. As Sophie looked around at her friends and family, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey she had been on. Sophie knew that life would always have its challenges, but she also knew that she was stronger than she had ever been. She had faced betrayal, heartache, and loss, but she had emerged on the other side with a renewed sense of self-worth and a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly love and be loved. Years later, Sophie often reflected on the path she had taken. She had learned that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the wrongs done to her, but about freeing herself from the hold of those wrongs. It was about reclaiming her life and choosing to live it on her own terms. Sophie continued to help others through her work and volunteer efforts, sharing her story of resilience and hope. She and Mia maintained a close relationship, one that was different from before but no less meaningful. Sophie had found peace, love, and happiness, not despite the betrayal she had faced, but because she had chosen to rise above it. She had learned that while the shadows of deceit could be dark and overwhelming, they didn't have to define her. She had the power to step into the light, to reclaim her life, and to find the love and happiness she truly deserved. And in that light, Sophie discovered a strength and a joy that would carry her through the rest of her days. As the years passed, Sophie continued to grow into the new life she had built for herself. Her relationship with Daniel blossomed into a deep and fulfilling partnership. They traveled together, supported each other's dreams, and created a life filled with love, trust, and mutual respect. It was the kind of relationship Sophie had always longed for, one that was honest, open, and built on a solid foundation. Mia remained an important part of Sophie's life, though their relationship had changed in many ways. The bond they once shared had been forever altered by the betrayal, but they had found a way to rebuild it into something new. They were no longer the inseparable sisters of their youth, but they were still family, connected by their shared history and the love that had weathered the storm. One evening, as Sophie and Daniel were preparing dinner together in their home, Sophie received a message from Mia. It was a simple text, asking if she could come over for a visit. Sophie hesitated for a moment, remembering all they had been through, but then she smiled and replied with a warm invitation. When Mia arrived, she looked more at ease than Sophie had seen her in a long time. They sat together in the living room, sipping tea and chatting about their lives. It felt natural, comfortable, a sign of how far they had both come. As they talked, Mia reached into her bag and pulled out a small, wrapped box. "I have something for you," she said, handing it to Sophie. Sophie took the box, her curiosity piqued. She carefully unwrapped it to reveal a beautifully crafted silver bracelet with a small charm in the shape of a heart. Inside the heart were the initials S and M, engraved delicately into the metal. "It's a symbol of us," Mia said softly. "Of our bond. I know things have changed, and I know I hurt you in ways I can never fully make up for. But I hope this can be a reminder of the love we've always had, even when it was hard to see." Sophie felt tears welling up in her eyes as she looked at the bracelet. It was a simple gesture, but it held deep meaning. She reached over and hugged Mia tightly, her heart swelling with gratitude and forgiveness. "Thank you, Mia," Sophie whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "This means more to me than you'll ever know." As they pulled back from the embrace, Sophie fastened the bracelet around her wrist, feeling the cool metal against her skin. It was a symbol of healing, of moving forward, and of the strength they had both found in each other. That evening, as Sophie and Daniel sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the horizon, she felt a deep sense of peace. The pain of the past had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something new, a quiet strength, a deeper understanding of herself and those she loved. Sophie knew that life would continue to bring its challenges, but she was ready for them. She had faced the worst and had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. She had learned to forgive, not just others, but herself as well. In the end, Sophie's story was not one of betrayal, but of resilience and renewal. She had found her way through the darkness, discovering a light within herself that would guide her for the rest of her life. As she leaned into Daniel's embrace, Sophie looked up at the sky, the stars beginning to twinkle in the fading light. She smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. The shadows of the past had finally lifted, and she was free to embrace the future with open arms. And in that moment, surrounded by love and the promise of a new day, Sophie knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be.